Welcome to the podcast here. I've got a welcomed guest today, Alan. Alan, please say hello.
Hello there, Jacob. Good to be here.
I'm glad you were able to get some time for me today. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while now. So for the viewers, Alan and I met in BSF as well, and I met him in 2018, and it was just one of those things where we got talking about God and within the Bible study, and before we knew it, we found out we're both in the engineering field, and we had a fair amount of quirks and characteristics that were similar. So we just kicked it off from there, and it was a lot of fun. And it's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to what the future has for it. So in this podcast, we're going to be talking about discipleship again, similar to the John live stream a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to be asking about Alan's experiences with mentorship and discipleship and how he got into the Christian faith. So Alan, please tell me what kind of experiences did you have with the church and fellow Christians before you officially got into the church?
So my mother was a child of an Italian immigrant couple, and so by definition they were Catholic, right? So she raised the three of us kids as in the Catholic Church to the point we were in the choir loft quite a bit of the time when she was playing the organ. So we were fully steeped in the Catholic religion, went through catechism, practiced the sacraments, the First Communion and confirmation and all of that. So I had, obviously a number of relationships with other peers, kids my age in the Catholic faith. Didn't see a lot of difference there. It was a liturgical experience through the church. So not life-changing and definitely not a relationship with Christ. So more rote memory kind of things. This is what you do. This is how you confess your sin. This is what you do, your penance for your sin. And it was very mechanical. Just leave it at that. So anyway, so that was our experience all the way up until I became a believer, which is, I don't know if you want me to move right into that or not, but
Sure, that's the second question. So, how your new identity changed you, how you got into the faith. So, no, I'm very curious. Go ahead.
So as a middle of high school or so, I was this straight A student all the way through my sophomore year in high school. So I was one of those guys, and I decided to go through a rebellious time. So I decided I'd see how the family responded to Alan not getting straight A's anymore, and started messing around. My parents were split when I was 6 or 7 or so, and remarried. Stepdad wasn't really involved in the raising of us kids, so my mom had that on her shoulders. And when I went through my rebellious time, I was a real pain in the neck, for lack of a better term. And she, when I graduated from high school, she told me that she thought I could probably do just about anything I wanted in life, except live there. So I was shown the door basically, and that's when I moved in with my dad, who wasn't too far away. He's now 10 miles, 15 miles away. And I moved in with him, not a believer at that time either. And continued doing my thing, and wasn't acting much different when I moved in with my dad. I did start college and went to college. About 6 months after that, I would go by and see my mom and my younger sister that was still in the house. My brother was off in Vietnam, actually. And I guess he was out of Vietnam by then. But anyway, I would go to visit them, and they were talking funny, like this, wanting to talk about Jesus. And it was like, this is a little bit uncomfortable. And one of the things that the Catholic faith did for me, I think, was still, I don't feel like I had a seared conscience. I still knew that I was messing up, and I knew there was a God. I hadn't questioned that at all. But So being around them was pretty uncomfortable, and I'd boogie out of there pretty quickly. And within about 3 months or so of going through that, they um, probably not thinking I was going to say yes, but I was pretty miserable with where I was at as a rebellious clown. And so they invited me to a Bible study prayer meeting kind of a thing. And I said yes, which, from the curb, you'd go, he's not going to say yes. And I ended up going. And I actually was asked if I wanted to receive Christ and to follow him by faith. And I said yes. And for me, that was, some people grow up in the church, not sure if it was when they were 7 or 9 or 11 when they accepted Christ and started walking with him. For me, it was not like that. It was a 1200 amp breaker that got thrown, and my life got put on its ear, basically. And which maybe God knew my personality and knew what I needed to see the light, if you will, and everything changed. I mean, I stopped hanging around with the guys that I was hanging around with. I stopped doing the stuff I was doing, which was mostly, just drinking on Friday nights kind of stuff. And anyway, there was no doubt in my mind that I had met the God of the universe and that life was going to be different from then on out. So much to the chagrin of my dad, who I was living with at the time, because he didn't get that. And he said it was a phase and that I would get over it. He's willing to bet you that 5 years from now, you won't believe what you believe now. And I only believed it more. That was 44 years ago. Anyway. So yeah, here we are, and never looked back. I looked sideways sometimes, I think, but I don't think I ever looked back. So
yeah, 5 years put maybe even longer, maybe 500 or something. That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, your dad was incorrect about that.
Yes, he was. And what a really cool thing was that was before email, obviously. And so I was writing letters to my brother just back. He was on the East Coast, 3,000 miles away on the East Coast in the Air Force, back from Vietnam. And I wrote him and told him about this experience that I'd had and that I was walking with God. And he wrote me back and said, sorry, man, but I beat you by a week. So he'd come to the Lord the week before I did. So in that 4 or 5 month period or something, my mom and sister came to the Lord through a neighbor, actually, and then myself and my brother. So all 4 of us came to the Lord, and that was in 75. So 74, 75. Yep.
That's great, because my family wasn't like that in the same regard. With me, I became a believer at 13, and it was more of like a Job 38 moment where God just lays on the heart of a young man that says, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know your own motivations very well, and you don't know who you are very well. And let me tell you a few things about you that you're not going to like. And it's just this divine comparison to who we are as a mortal. And I had no choice in the matter, and just ignoring it, I had to come to terms with it and say, I think God's right. And from then on, it was I need to be more cognizant of what I'm doing, because it's not just about me anymore. And that was the start of my walk in 2005. That's so cool, though. In 1975, 74, a big portion of your family came to the faith, and that must have changed you quite a bit as far as your character goes. What other characteristics started to change about you?
Well, there's some things that are still changing. Obviously, it takes, sanctification you have to have patience with sanctification, because it's a slow process on some fronts, and some of it's personality, and some of it, I was impatient back then. I still deal with impatience, not like I did then, maybe, but and I would exhibit some of that. And my brother, who came home from the Air Force, the next year, I guess, he's 4 years older, so he would give me a bad time, and you know, I would say things that I don't know that he'd consider it blasphemy, but it was like I'm frustrated with God or something. You know, as a new believer, you're trying to work all that out, and he'd roll his eyes because he was just enough older that it was like he had a little bit more maturity, and he was always a more patient guy than me. He's passed since, so that's why I say past tense. But anyway, he'd call me up short from time to time. But obviously, character is developed over time. I took very serious my walk with God, even in the early days, and wanted to know more and more and learn more and more. So I was in my spare time. I was an engineering student at the time, so there wasn't a lot of spare time maybe, but I was starting to learn the disciplines of being a believer and disciplines of the faith, if you will, and learning to pray and to study, and that starts becoming a part of you, and that starts coming out in your conversations and how you look at people, and you know, how you identify with sin and things that you know don't please God and that you want to change. And so that's kick off the process, and then over time you grow in all of those things, and you get, every once in a while you get a look back, you know, different milestones. Maybe now you're 30 and you look back and go, oh my gosh, I'm way down the road from where I was when I was 22, whatever, you know. And then at 40 you do the same thing, and now I'm 63, just turned 63, and I'm looking back going, wow, maybe I learned more in the last 5 years than I have in the last 40, you know, kind of a thing. So it just continues. So
And I would have to agree with that too. There seems to be a slow, steady, incremental progress, and we talk about this in other parts of the podcast material from previous podcasts, where it doesn't always change you immediately, but there obviously is a spark, and that's the conversion phase. But then the real sanctification's the long road of steady process of becoming more and more like Christ. And it seems that we fail so much, even in that sanctification, but it's been so amazing that year after year after year you see God's faithfulness, and it allows you to just spring back again. It's the Holy Ghost giving you just a little more grace and a little more love that allows the process to continue. And it's so great that we have him, because if that weren't the case, I think it would just be back to what you had in the Catholic faith, at least in that sector, where it's mechanical. It's more about this is the right way, but there isn't any life to it. And I'm so glad that's not the case in what you're talking about.
right.
Now, I was going to ask you about how you got into mentorship as well, because we actually do a fair amount of podcasting on mentorship. And what led you to getting into that, and how are you practicing it?
I had some kind of a disease that dictated that I would be self-employed at some point, probably earlier than later. So I was constantly, I went to junior college, and then I quit for 3 years and worked in the surveying field, and had a mentor there, as a matter of fact. And then I went back to university and finished my degree in civil engineering, and got my surveyor's license and started an engineering company. I was looking for an off-ramp to self-employment sooner than later. And at age 26, I started a civil engineering company. And it was small at the time. It grew to 75 people over time, over quite a while. And I owned it for 34 years, and then sold it to an international firm, and I've worked with them for the last few years, and I'm kind of winding that down right now. So through that, you start, you know, obviously small and young. I think that mentorship is a relative thing, in that it's relative to the mentor-mentee gap, and how much, you know, one knows more than the other, kind of a thing, is that has something to share. And then it's progressive, you know, that those relationships change over time and what you have to share. And then I think it's also a state of mind. It's it's a mindset of, I need to be transferring what I know to other people, not just so that we can make more money on a job or something, but you have a responsibility in a sense to society or to those around you. And mentoring being a little different than discipleship, they're analogous also. I think, you're in the discipleship world, when I was first a believer, I didn't think I had anything to share, and yet you were probably mentoring at least by example to the younger guys. You remember when you were a senior in high school and you saw that guy that's been out of high school for 2 or 3 years drive by the campus in his hot car, and you thought, man, that guy, he's got the world by the tail, and this kid's 20 years old maybe, right? And yet, so there's that person has an opportunity to speak into your life even when you're 18 and he's 20. But so in the discipleship world, I think that was pretty mellow for quite a while, while you were growing in the faith and discovering what it is that you might have to share with somebody. Mentoring or discipleship, either one, is all relationship based. So if there isn't a relationship there, you're probably not mentoring or discipling. So that's an important aspect of all of that. So you build a relationship and then you have an opportunity, unless it's a super formal teacher student kind of a relationship and a professional kind of a thing. And then there might not be a lot of relationship there, but I don't think that's the best mentoring personally. But
yeah, so what you're talking about is the forming of a relationship between a mentor and a mentee. And we've talked about how the mentee is this striving person that wants to get better and has made that choice and has sought out somebody wiser that may be able to steer him in the right direction. And the mentor has said, I accept the responsibility of giving them what they need in order to steer their life properly from the mistakes or maybe the successes that they've made. And through that, you get a relationship formed through friendship. And that's been so cool to hear how I've heard a couple of your stories about what you've been doing. And I wanted to hear how you've practiced that, because for me, it's been in the AICHE realm. So that's back in the university kind of sector, where you've got a lot of young people, a lot of people that don't quite know where they're going. And when they get just somebody who's just a little bit older than them, like that 18 to 20-year-old difference,
yeah,
it's a big game changer, because in that 2 years, they've been able to really turn their life into something that was totally different than what they were just reaching, graduating high school, for example. Their life direction it might as well be night and day.
Yeah. There's a sense in which they don't, that 20, I don't know, maybe your age or the 30-year-old guy that hasn't been out of school that long, they don't necessarily want to hear from the old guy. They want to hear from somebody that's 5 years older than them, that are, they're thinking the same, they're processing things the same. They went to the same restaurant or the pub, the night before, whatever that person really looks up to that person. I think that, and maybe we'll talk more about mentor-mentee relationships, but that relationship, not every mentor-mentee relationship is made in heaven. Some of them are better than others for those very reasons, personality or whatever. So as a mentor, you should take that responsibility seriously. And if you're not the right person for that mentee, then you find somebody that is. And I worked pretty hard when we were 75 people, making sure that people were getting the help they needed, and kind of hand picking that person and saying, you're really the right person. You're 10 years older in the career or whatever, and you'll resonate with this mentee a lot better than maybe I would, or somebody else in the office.
You're more than welcome to talk about some of the relationships between the mentor and the mentee, some of those details. That is definitely what I want to hear about from you.
Remember, mentoring isn't just about hard science. I mean, I come from the civil engineering world, so there was a lot of hard science, but I was also, I'm kind of a weird civil engineer in that I'm more of a generalist in a lot of ways. I can be a specialist when I need to be, but so I'm looking at bigger picture stuff. So I'm looking not only at hard science, I'm looking at the relationship between the engineer and the architect, or some of the other subs. I'm looking at personality profiles. I'm thinking about how people are interacting. And so, and you can mentor, and people that are not successful in a company a lot of times isn't because they're not technically competent. It's because they don't get along with the people around them, or they have a wrong self-assessment, of how they're interacting with others. And so it was fun for me to mentor them. Sometimes it was a walk around the building because it was, I had some hard things to say to them maybe, but trying to think of other relationships. I had one surveyor towards the end of my career after the '08 recession. We did a lot of reorganization, and I ended up kind of reinventing myself again, and ended up in the field some, back to my surveying roots. And I had a young man that great kid. He was a believer, very, very, very quiet. Although I found out that he wasn't as quiet as I thought, and he was funnier. And I'll get out. We'd be in the truck, and I'd be laughing my guts out. But we got out in the field, and he did not know how to even look on a construction site, and it was going to be embarrassing in a sense. He would sit, he's going to drive a stake in the ground, and he would sit cross-legged there and start pounding the thing, so I would walk across the grade and have a talk with him. And that's mentoring. That wasn't anything about the math that went into that he would learn in time. It was about more of the soft side thing. How should you look on a construction job when a guy comes by you in a bulldozer? Do you want to look like this, or do you want to look like this? And how are you going to be perceived, and all those soft side things? That young man has turned out to be a licensed surveyor. One of the highlights of those relationships is that over time, they start talking like you. They start using similar vernacular, telling the same kind of stories, looking at things the way you do. And then the cherry on top is when they take what you've taught them and they use that as a launch pad to move to the next level, maybe beyond you even. If your mentee passes the mentor, I guess some mentors might take that as a disappointment, but you don't compete with your mentor, your mentee. You want them to succeed, right? So if they use that experience as a launch pad to do things that you didn't do, that for me is kind of nirvana. That's as good as it gets from a mentor-mentee relationship. And it's similar with our kids. I mean, because there weren't Christians before my generation in our family, as I became a believer, and I started thinking, getting closer to getting married, and then thinking about having kids, I wanted to have that trend break and go another direction and create an opportunity for our kids to know the Lord, and then to, not to compete with them, but to have them do things in the kingdom that I didn't get the opportunity to because I was coming from behind maybe. So that's the same kind of it's analogous, I guess.
Yeah, I would say being able to get people to the next level, and once they've reached that surpassing state, and they don't really need you as much anymore, I think that's amazing, because now they really don't need you anymore and they can go help somebody else. What that's done is the transition of information to them, and the soft skills and the character they needed is now in them. It's become together and integrated.
Yeah. That's leverage. Yeah.
And without that, that same level of just allowing them to be all that they could, if they stayed in a mentee state forever, I don't think that's a good idea, because in the, let's say the mentor has to leave for some reason. If they never really got to step up to the plate and surpass the skills of the one that was teaching them, or even get to the same level or somewhere on the same order, they are going to have a lot tougher time when they may have to assume that role. And now all of a sudden, I don't know how to be a mentor. I've only learned about taking. I've never learned about giving.
Right.
So in your case, I think that's cool, because then when the transition's complete, that actually frees up not just you but them. They can go help somebody else. You can go help somebody else, and now you can come together more as peers and less about that mentor-mentee relationship.
Then the line between mentor and mentee gets really blurry because you're going back and forth with, almost teaching each other things as a peer. Yeah. Now in
And
the discipleship
yeah,
world, I think that never ends. I'm 63, but I want somebody older than me, or maybe not older, but maybe more mature some way, but um, speaking into my life. That's a little bit different dynamic. Is it mentor mentee? Maybe not. Maybe it's just encouragement and instructive and practicing the one another scriptures, if you will. But
yeah, that's the iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. The Proverbs 27:17 famous verse, where there's some things that you see about me just from looking at me in the third person that I can't see in myself as acting in the first person, and vice versa. So just
right,
having that second believer there automatically allows you to contrast yourself from a different angle. And oh, I didn't know I was behaving that way. I didn't know it was affecting people this badly. Maybe I should change my actions. And now that I've been told about this, I can be more cognizant of it in the future. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't have fellow believers
right,
sometimes pointing that out. I don't think we're designed to be aware of 100% of how we are viewed in the third person.
right, correct. Yeah, and healthy organizations, I think, are always giving feedback so that you have an opportunity to recalibrate. Some people they don't answer the mail, but most people, I think, want to hear some kind of feedback and at least know, yeah, this is frowned upon. I shouldn't act like this. I'm going to still act like this. Well, that's one cognitive decision, but most people, I think, will try to do some kind of form of behavior modification if need be.
I would say there's a tendency for people to drift if they don't get that.
Yep.
And if that's a problem, because, well, we need to be on our game when we're out there, and when we're serving God or serving others or both. There's if we're not getting that recalibration or feedback, that should be how we. Oh, I understand that I need to be able to change, so I can help this person today, and then maybe I can help these other people tomorrow. And if it's impeding their progress, let's say in mentorship, you're stuck in the same strategy where you've got another mentee you need to take care of. That's not going to do them any good. So it makes sense to change your strategy and be open to feedback.
Organizations that don't embrace that end up having, it's like the frog in the pan of water on the stove. All of a sudden it's boiling, and it's a giant issue, and we've gone from no feedback to a corrective action plan. And that never plays well for anybody. I mean, that's not hardly fair to the employee, and that in the employee employer relationship. And I think we could say the same about discipleship too, or just life in the church and our walk with God. I'm not giving you any input along the way, and all of a sudden we have a giant Matthew 18 calling out sin, and it's horrible. It doesn't have to be horrible.
Yeah.
Matthew 18 wasn't horrible. It was a process, and if you can win the brother back, obviously you want to, but just from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds instead of having it be over time and maybe mitigating the whole issue in the first place.
Yeah, and being able to deal with these problems, I really can't stand it when you get into these moments where, okay, I'm not supposed to change, not supposed to change, and then there's this just big spike of issues that we have to take care of right now, and then we have to slowly get back to a steady line. Whereas what we were talking about earlier of being able to stay within a range and just going up, down, up, down, up, down, and staying near the set point where we want to be. And if we're always doing this radical change and then radical corrective action, it's that seems to be a lot of time wasted just trying to get back down to put the band-aid on it, and then you're not even we're so tired from it, you're not always looking out for the next spike. And
Well, it burns a lot of calories too. You know, that's not helpful. Yeah, you're burning calories in the wrong direction.
yeah, and being able to not put up those boundaries and the right boundary conditions on where we want our set point to be in mentorship, discipleship, that's bad for everybody else, because then how are they supposed to figure it out if we're behaving this way? There is this sense that we should be competent in what we're doing, in both taking care of people and taking care of the job, and still being in a stable state. So when we go home and go to the people in our personal lives, we're still the same sanctified person that is there, instead of this just broken individual where the work relationships are good, but the family is ruined, or the family is okay, but the work life is ruined.
As a leader, managing expectations is so important. It's hard to hold somebody responsible to something that they don't know about, right? You need to make sure that you make this budget. So what's the budget? Well, I'm not going to tell you what the budget is. Well, that doesn't work, you know? And it's the same all the way across the board. In Christendom or in discipleship, the expectation is more God's expectation, not the employers or the company's expectation. It's what God is, the direction, the target. What are we focusing on? You know, the life of Christ and how we're becoming more like Him. So that's the focus, and that's what's communicated, and that's what's calibrated against. And how are you doing? I don't think the church asks, how are we doing enough? I think it mostly is, well, that's another soapbox, but anyway.
No, and that's fine, because we should be asking ourselves, to what extent are we failing and succeeding in our walk in sanctification? That's a big chunk of being a believer on planet Earth. And in discipleship, if we can't even do that, and you just say, how are you doing? Fine. And then you talk about something funny, or you derail the subject towards something superficial, or just even dodging the question, we do ourselves a disservice for the next time, because chances are that's going to be a habit. And now you've got this habitual problem of, okay, so I'm with Christians and I don't take care of business, so to speak, with the way
under the carpet. Yeah.
And then it ends up being this monster. Jordan Peterson had a good example of this this dragon. It's like a small dragon about this size, and there's a kid who keeps saying this dragon exists, but the mom keeps saying it doesn't. And eventually, it's so big because it kept getting stronger from this cover-up, so to speak, that it just took over the whole house. And eventually, they were able to get it back down again when they were able to deal with the problem. So it's an analogy for, don't let your small things in your life turn into this big dragon where all of a sudden, oh, how did it get this big? Oh, we never dealt with it. And now it's turned into something that is so big that we actually have to devote an incredible amount of resources to it to get it back to a manageable level, or even gone altogether.
So there's courage required there to deal with it while it's small, right? So it sounds like it's a prayer request from God, you know, please give me the courage to deal with these things while they're small, because they're important. Because they're important now, and they'll be a problem later.
So I had other questions concerning mentorship.
Sure.
So you mentioned one example of taking a person that was in the surveying field, and now he's licensed and was able to pull himself up from entry-level guy to someone who's now able to operate on his own. Do you have any other examples of how you're continuing in mentorship and discipleship today?
Today, God has been putting on my heart ministry to men, as opposed to men's ministry being more connoting more of a program, and ministry to men being more of a organic. And I mean, it's maybe a subtle difference or characterization, but I like ministry to men. So anyway, God's put that on my heart in the last few years. And over the last year and a half, I've started that in our church that didn't have a ministry to men. Had a couple of different men's Bible study or a parenting group or something that's starting to meet. But we have 10 guys that have been meeting as kind of a founding leadership team, and we have dinner together 2 nights a month. And I've been in the process of creating a common vernacular, if you will, amongst us. And so when we talk about being plugged into the vine, everybody knows what that means. And from Gospel of John, or walking in the Spirit, what does that mean? We have an understanding. Are there other understandings of what walking in the Spirit is? Sure. But we have one that is a working knowledge of that, and we understand that. So if somebody goes, I'm not, everybody else understands that. So now we've grown this group that's strong and can't imagine not meeting biweekly. Now we're able to take that and expand it and scale it within the church. And so we're putting a strategy together for how we're going to do that. Men's ministry can be, I've heard it actually characterized as a fool's errand. I don't believe that you're giving men something that they're not asking for in some cases. So for those people, for those guys, maybe they won't engage in this. But what I'm finding is most guys that you engage in are relational with and listen to and become not only friends, but confidants, they appreciate it a bunch. They've got a lot that they're carrying. So that's the twist on mentoring, I guess, for me now. I'm still involved in the engineering world, but not much for much longer. I just finished a large project, and not huge opportunity for mentoring, although quite a bit soft side contract stuff. I was able to be involved with some fairly senior guys that knew their way around pretty well, but most of the good engineers kind of pushed the soft side stuff away. So that was more my gift. So I tried to share those things as much as possible, and to read the room and to answer the mail and some of the other cliches that we have, that, when the client asks for something, you make sure you answer the mail, kind of a thing. So primarily, I think mentoring now, I have done some executive coaching in the last couple of years. That's kind of run its course now, but it was for a heavy civil construction company, and I had 11 of their leaders that I was coaching on a monthly basis. So that was taking quite a bit of my time. Knew what they were about and was able to do, because I know their world, I was able to plug into that. It doesn't make me this awesome coach necessarily, but I became more of a confidant and somebody that could speak into their lives and draw the answers that they already had in their head. They just didn't know it, maybe, drew those out. So, but that's run its course now. So right now, primarily, I would say that it's around, there's some church governance stuff that I'm involved in, and then also the ministry to men. So that's where I'm plugged in. And that will take as much time as you're willing to give it. I will tell you.
Yeah. So the second to last thing you said, what was that name called?
Of church governance?
Yeah, church governance. Tell me about church governance if you have time.
I will keep it short. Just there are questions about what that model ought to look like in our particular church, and how the leaders are acting, and there's a number of us that are bringing some light to that subject, and they're having to deal with it. And I think they're doing so graciously, but it's been somewhat of a painful process, if you will, as there's been a lot of different entry points into different things. They're all symptoms of probably some similar issues that need to be addressed. So I'm involved with that now. And would I call that mentoring? Probably. This is more peer-to-peer kind of of relationship, all those relationships starts becoming a rubber band. It's, you know, it's different for different people, and maybe all folds of the same cloth. As God continues to grow you, you find out he's using those things that he's taught you over the years in different entry points, in different contexts. So in this case, men's ministry is much different for me than church governance or polity. So
and they're different because men's ministry is more the continual relationship between a small sect of men that have decided that we're going to take care of each other in ways that the church did back in the first century. We're going to pray for each other. We're going to listen to each other's problems, and we're going to try and help each other through some of the problems if possible. But then church governance, is that more of the see if we can optimize how we give, or how we equip our church leaders? Is it more like that, or
more the leadership model? And is the leadership trusting the body of Christ? You know, it's not the leader's church, it's Christ's church. And so how are they representing Christ in that? And how are they trusting? This is an old problem. I mean, this has been going on forever, probably, you know, and it's probably a little different brand of this in every church. You know, some maybe have it dialed in more than others because they got the right mix of gifts in the leadership roles, that and they were able to listen to each other and be humble and submit to one another and create a unity. You know, unity obviously is important. We happen to be having a crisis of unity at this time, and we're praying through that. And I have every trust right now that we're going to get through it, and that God's going to, you know, I don't question anybody's heart or their motive, or, you know, it's not like they're all arrogant and they just have a big problem. There's some blind spots I think we just need to see through, so that people aren't being hurt by, you know, the people that are bringing issues are people that are, if you're familiar with the Pareto Principle, the 20-80 rule kind of a thing, these are the 20% that have a heart the size of this room, that want to serve and be involved and are coming in love and saying, we have an issue here, we need to solve this, you know, and how can we do this? And so they've kind of been, and these people are coming all independent of one another. They don't even know that anybody else is doing this. And all of a sudden we find out that there's 10 different people or couples. My wife and I happen to be two of the people that came. And so we're working through that. So
yeah, the Pareto principle is so if you take, what was it? You take 100 people, 10 people are doing 80% of the work. Yeah.
In his case, it was 20%. And in most organizations, and the church isn't much different than the company down the road kind of a thing. It's 20% of the people do 80% of the work kind of thing. Probably 20% of the people do 80% of the giving. You know, in a company, there's a lot of people that are going along for the ride and trying to show up for work and not carry some of the load. So
yeah, and that happens in so many other social circles where it gets to be a problem because, well, if your extreme people that give and serve are only growing linearly, the rate at which the people that are just along for the ride is a 4-to-1 difference. That means
right.
that we're always going to be in a losing fight there. So that mentorship is, maybe we can get people from that closer to the 20%. Maybe they don't have to be the crazy giver, but maybe we can take someone who is giving nothing and now they can give something with gratitude and actually be a secondary member in the role of being in the church. And that to me, that's a win. So we've taken somebody who's out way on the third standard deviation below average, and now we put him up just maybe even one standard deviation above average. That's an incredible feat. And if we don't find ways to transfer that info, we may find that a lot of those people in the 20% get overwhelmed and they say, you know what, as much as I want to give and serve and love, I'm so deadbeat tired that I need to find a way to just go somewhere else where I don't have to stay this way. And
Or compromising things that are very, very important to me, that my family or whatever, something that I know I have a responsibility to, and I can't do it because I'm doing these other things.
yeah, and that's not fair to them because
Right.
that happened to my own family actually. So
Yeah.
my family in 1999, they were in a church for about 7 years, and it was about that time where they said, this church thing is turning into a second job. So they told me one day, Jake, we're leaving, and then they quit. It was a complete break. So they went from being in that 20% of really giving and putting in an incredible amount of hours at the church to just zero one day.
Mm.
So one day, and then they have yet to trust church again, which was a big lesson for me as a young 7-year-old going, oh, okay, this is what happens if you work somebody too hard. And I didn't quite understand what that meant at 7, but as I've thought about it over the last 20 years, it's developed into, this has become something I want to get right, absolutely. Because I could only imagine what it would be like if I had a son and he did the same mistake that happened to my family earlier. And then, great, now I've got parents that don't want to participate in the same way. They'll still believe in God and they'll still keep it to their house, but they want nothing to do with any believer body. And then having other family that's in the same boat and I'm stuck in the middle. Ooh, that's not good.
Yeah.
So I had another mentorship experience that caused me to take this more seriously. I had somebody break down in the library when I was 21, and she was one of my mentees, and the stress of the university got to her. And I've told this story a couple other times, but it was one of those moments where God said, people are valuable, they can break, you can mess up, and they can never recover. In her case, she did, but she ended up leaving the university over it. And it was one of those moments where God said, take care of people. You never know when it's all of a sudden that they just can't take it anymore because they weren't getting the help they needed. And in that case, she actually said, you were one of the few people that were helping me. Thank you. Otherwise, I would have broke down even earlier. But nonetheless, it was a big lesson for me to don't think people are that tough to where they don't need anybody.
Well, that's a heartbreaker. I know some people that have walked away from the church similar to your parents, and obvious that's not even a scriptural stance. We're called to not forsake the meeting of one another and all the one another scriptures that are there, obviously, to be in community, and to say, well, the community beat me up, and now I'm not going to be a part of the community anymore. That's a shame, to say the least.
It goes back to the corrective action thing we talked about. Massive corrective action.
Right.
And in the case of what I'm doing, or what we're doing with BSF, I think it's wonderful because that's been the right balance for me to have about 2 hours a week with believers that's devoted to Bible study, that's consistent reading throughout the week. And even if I end up reading 3 days out of the week instead of the 7 because of work or something, that at least what got me to stay in tune with the scripture, not to forsake it. Consider it as a big portion of our lives to continue to read and pay attention to throughout the week, and to be able to talk to other believers as well in discussion about how we can continue to strive toward what God wants. And that's been so beneficial for me because I have to work Sundays. So with this on Thursday, it's been a game changer to stay with it. And don't forsake the meeting your fellow brethren. And I think that's a good balance to a lot of what the modern church has been doing. Because I've seen it too, even as I went out the door. And I always took that as a note of, okay, some churches are going to try and run you to the ground with so much serving that you need to be cognizant of it. So I was, and I still am. I don't think I'll ever stop thinking that way, just because that happened to be so young that I needed to be careful about who I was going to associate with. So, and that's sad, because I don't think the first century church would have said anything like that. They would have probably been found aghast if I told them something like that.
Yeah. I think that you could have a really good church that has a blind spot and uses people up in a sense. And so in that situation, I don't think you walk from the church necessarily. Ask God for help in how to communicate that, but also take some responsibility yourself for who and what you're doing in the church, and how you're engaging, and just being responsible for your time, understanding what you can do and what you can't do. In First Timothy, it talks about if you're called to the ministry and leadership, I think it's talking about deacons at that point. It's not under compulsion. So if you say, I can't do this, and leadership says, well, too bad, we need you to do it anyway, you've just disqualified yourself by saying that you can't do it. And so they need to respect that, because at that point you're not called to do it. So, because it's got to be a balanced statement. I'm called to do it. I can do it. I can put that much time into it and go be, engaged in this way.
As opposed to, oh, they said no, but really we're going to put them in charge of it anyway, because I said so.
Because they could fog a mirror. Yeah.
And it's a strange way it's a strange thing to occur, but it does happen. And the sad part is I've seen it in a couple other churches as I've grown up, and I've been hyper vigilant to be careful of people like that. And then there's also the church concept of, well, you got to be careful of what church is doing what thing, because you don't know who's the believers and who aren't sometimes. And for me, that was a big, whoa, wait, what do you mean I can't tell? I should totally be able to tell. Doesn't the scripture say the fruits of the Spirit should be pouring out of them? They should be excited to be learning about God and serving Him. There should be some telltale signs. So when I was getting that impression from other people like my parents, and it was more than them, it was other burnout Christians who I'm still friends with, but I was still getting some of the similar vibes of, you need to be careful who these people are. And with that said, I guess I'll just be careful, but also God says you got to serve somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Don't be too careful.
Don't be too careful. There is some level of,
exactly. Yeah, that's not an excuse to walk away, I don't think. Well, I can't tell for sure, so I just won't be involved at all. I don't think that's the right place to be either.
Especially if it's going to be that close to your identity. If you really identify and have said, God has saved me at this particular point, there are implications with that. Maybe not as far as justification, but as far as sanctification, there are. I think that's the justification is the tip of the iceberg, and then sanctification is the rest, with glorification probably on a completely different graph.
That's the good part.
It's the best part. That's why it's on the different graph.
Next page.
Exactly. So, Alan, I had a few other questions as far as some lessons learned from all of your years of mentoring and the several groups you've mentioned. Could you name a few and why you think they matter so much?
Lessons learned. I think it's important that you have some structure around mentoring. Again, this is managing expectations, but not too much structure. Too much structure creates maybe some undue pressure on the mentee, and not enough creates an opportunity for dissatisfaction. That there wasn't was I being mentored or wasn't I? Kind of a question. So again, managing expectations. If you are going to be in a more formal mentor-mentee relationship, that you maybe are careful to create a beginning and a middle and an end, so that you have something to look forward to and say, okay, I understand. We got to the end. This is what I needed to learn from this particular engagement, if you want to call it that. Some mentor-mentee relationships last for 15 years because as that person is evolving, so is the mentor, and he's out in front and he's able to continue to pour into that person's life. I became more of a business owner than an engineer. I started reading more business books than engineering books at some point. So I was having to count on my managers, technical managers and technical leads to mentor on a technical side. So I was mentoring on more of the soft side stuff. But there were times where I would commit to teaching somebody something in particular, and we would create a beginning and a middle and an end and say, okay, and whatever you do in there, make sure that you're giving feedback and allowing them to recalibrate and giving them encouragement and saying, you're knocking this out of the park. I mean, we're not all the way to the end yet, but where you're at so far, that surveyor that I talked about, it was so satisfying to tell him that he was getting an A, if you will. He was knocking it out and creating great completed staff work. And no, you're not to the place where I am in client communications, but on the technical side, you're nailing it. And if you look at a career, for instance, in trimesters, which is what I tend to do, where you're learning your first trimester, you're basically learning your craft. The second trimester, you're creating your network, if you will, still learning your craft, but you're creating a network. And then the last trimester, you're in sage mode and working your network. So if you kind of keep that loose third structure in mind, then you kind of know where a person's at in his career and you help him manage that through those milestones. Super satisfying.
I like what you said about not having too many boundaries and encouraging them along the way. So they have this sense that they're not in this alone. They have the support they need, but they can also do it, and that there is a structure where they can succeed. And that to me was so important in doing it in AICAG, because there were so many people that thought they didn't belong there, that they weren't smart enough. And it was getting rid of all of those. You may feel like this. And this disclaimer, you may feel like you don't belong here. You're here nonetheless. You're investing time and money, and you're making new friends. You need to treat this seriously. So you can think this, but don't let it stop you from working as hard as you need to succeed at UC Davis.
Nice. Yep.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. I thought you had something
right.
else.
The only thing else I was going to say was that if you create an environment of trust and mutual respect, and the mentor isn't supposed to flex his muscle and show the mentee how much he knows. That's not what it's about. By definition, the mentor knows more than the mentee, and the mentee doesn't have to be reminded of that. It's more of create this environment where nothing is more satisfying. I've said this already, so I guess I can't say it again, but it's very satisfying to have the mentee come to you with some completed staff work that is over and beyond what your expectation was, even, because at that point it's almost parent-child, at the risk of being condescending, which I don't mean to be, with, hey, I was able to knock this one out of the park. He's going to be so pleased with this. You better be pleased when he shows it to you, because you have a big responsibility there to keep that person girded up and knowing that he's being supported. And when you do well, it's acknowledged, and you move on. And then, and depending on the company structure, those people are typically looking for your endorsement or your sponsorship and advancement too in the company, and which is you want to do. You come from here to here. Obviously, I want you to advance in this company, and you have that opportunity too.
I'm glad how you brought up rewarding somebody immediately for doing something beyond expectations. So, because in human psychology, they are doing something I really like. We need to make sure they continue this type of habit, because if they continue to, who knows where they can go with their career and how they're going to be able to influence other people in a positive way. And so that's good. I've heard that from Jordan Pearson. He's a clinical psychologist, and he says, yeah, there's nothing. As soon as someone does something you like, you need to reward them immediately, so that way they can fully encompass and get that habit solid in them, at least in communicating with you.
There are a lot of company structures that keep you from being able to do that too. Whether, not that it has to be monetary necessarily, and there's no mechanism to get a monetary something, but I wrote an awful lot of cards, an awful lot of, you throw a Starbucks card in there and go, hey, was just thinking about what you did, and I know this is a small token, but it's the note was every bit as important as the Starbucks, and probably 10 times more important, because you got acceptance, you got acknowledged, you got, oh, this guy understands that I'm working my tail off here, and I really want to learn this, and I'm doing my best. So we at our engineering company had way lower our turnover than the industry standard for those reasons. I think that we created a culture there where I still have people come to me that worked for us over the years saying, best engagement in my career because of that culture that we had. So glory to God.
Glory to God. And I think that's how he'd want it. It's if we're moving towards heaven in the way that we continue in our sanctification, that seems more like it than just, I'm going to suck the life out of this person until I get all the things that I want done. And then there'll be just the next project around the corner where I want to do it again. Oh, then he gets tired. That's fine. There's another person out there I'll suck the life out of again, and just keep the cycle going. And I just don't understand. I understand how that's supposed to work. All you're doing is you're making more and more people decide that work is this horrible place to be, and they're going to drain you, and they're going to take you for your technical knowledge and just suck the personal life out of you. I don't understand that.
Or if you do it the other way, you have people that'll take a bullet for you, and it's not like you're going to do it all the time, but we had opportunities to work an all-nighter or something, to hit a deadline, and people were coming out of the woodwork to stay the night, and I brought pizza in or whatever, and we got the job done. And that it's not like you do that weekly, because that's going to get old pretty quickly, but I don't know that I want to test the loyalty that much, but for when we needed to step up, we stepped up, and we were happy to do it. And it was a family kind of a thing. And I can't imagine not being here. Let's do this. So,
and that's because there is this sense that it's not all about them. That they have a team that's got their back. There's this sense of responsibility that has been installed in them, and the leader that's telling them also believes this and is working right there with them. It's a totally different game. Whereas, get this done by Friday, and I'm not going to help you, and it's all on your own. And that's how I feel in a lot of jobs that I've had, where you get this sense that you're on your own, no one's going to help you. You've got to, if you want to get help, you got to go find it, and you got to drag somebody by the collar and get their attention for 10 minutes. That's the impression I get.
And the person making the demand isn't going to work a minute longer than he was going to work anyway. Yeah. Right.
So what team are you on? Well, you're not. You're not on a team. Oh, okay. Well, that's going to do two things. One, that's either going to make your psyche go, you need to get into a team. And that might mean just taking your chances and going somewhere else. Or you're going to be agreeable and hunker down and see if that they change their mind, they may accept you more. And as you find out that they don't, you will get more bitter and resentful, because you're not getting the psychological and
Right.
teamwork support that I think humans are wired for. I think God wanted it that way. So you really would take a bullet for somebody when the time was right, or if the event needed to take place, because they do the same for you. And there's this value that God keeps bringing in about human beings that I think some people in the workforce just don't understand.
So yeah, before we get off this subject, I do want to. This isn't a mea culpa or anything, but
Sure.
uh, how I explained how we ran the company was where my heart was at and how I practiced it. Did we do it perfect? No. There were misreads. There was a hurt feeling or something. There were a number of times come to mind that I would have to go to somebody and ask for their forgiveness, because something came down from the company. Maybe I was involved with it. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe it was a manager or somebody that mishandled something, and I did my best to follow up with them and to make it right. But it wasn't always perfect. And if you're going for it, the way we were talking about on the first side of that issue, people are much more apt to give you the forgiveness, when you come and ask for it and go, hey, well, you've been trying for the most part, this is paraphrase, but basically you've been trying and it's been really good. And that was a screw up and that's not your style. I get it. Let's move on. So it's like all our other relationships in life, hopefully.
Yeah, disclaimer, people are going to mess up. There's going to be sin in there.
Yeah.
There will be a guarantee of hurt feelings. I would actually I would go to that to go
Sure.
so far.
Yeah.
Because I can't figure out exactly what they're thinking about, but I know there will be a guarantee at some point I will hurt somebody's feelings. But
Yeah.
I also need to establish that bridge of if I did overstep my bounds to get the working relationship back to the right place, and for them to understand that the boundary conditions of where it should be.
To the degree it's up to me to live at peace with all men, right? So what does that look like? It's getting it right with them.
And it's not about getting it perfect, but at least the direction. I think if there's anything we got in the last few minutes about getting that working relationship correct and working in a way that I think God would want, with how Scripture is has said about working with our fellow man, I think that is more aligned with how Jesus would want his team to be ran. So if we ever had to hold an account for it, of well, how did you treat people? Okay, this is how I ran this responsibility within a company, and this is how I was as a just a worker in the company, for example. Okay, you messed up quite a bit here. Good thing you have my grace, though. It's okay. Okay. What a relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the leadership again, and then mentorship as part of leadership is having a vision and then communicating that vision. And then you can get people wrapped around that vision and all rowing in the same direction. It's amazingly powerful.
It's funny. John said the same thing, and I couldn't agree more. Being able to have that vision, because if you're never really sharing with them where the direction is, you've got all these people that are wondering what it is, instead of you just telling them, and then now they can align or disagree or give you feedback on that vision to make it either better, or if the vision's correct, just maintain course.
Yeah.
But you have to tell them.
Yep. I love
Disclaimer.
telling people this is what you do to be successful in this job. If they understand those expectations, they've got such a better opportunity to win. What does winning feel like? Yeah.
I'm glad that
Yeah.
there is somebody out there that understands that from a leadership perspective, because sometimes you work at the same place, or you've heard so many of your friends, let's say, at different companies, which is also my case. So I've got friends that, man, they just don't understand. We're in another crunch. I feel like I'm being marginalized and just, oh, just do your job, don't worry about it. And that's so strange to me. because when I thought we were getting into engineering, I thought we'd be getting in with some people who really understood how to make teams, because we saw it in school. But granted, when there's money involved, I bet it changes people's minds, I bet, pretty quick.
Just do your job. What does that mean?
Yeah.
How is it explained to you that what winning feels like? I need in our world, in the civil engineering world, like accountants, even they have billable hours they have to get, right? As opposed to your job, which you're not thinking about billable hours. You're there for a certain number of hours a week, probably, and you're not billing each hour. Where we, as a consultant, we're billing hours. And like I say, that's a CPA or accounting firm is going to have something similar. So we just want your utilization to be, 80%, whatever the number is. Well, I would do the math for people and say, if it's 80%, that's 32 hours billable. That's probably about this many hours a day. When you do your time card on Friday, when you're finishing up on Friday, how many hours is it? That's 32 hours billable. When you explain it that way, it's amazing how people meet their utilization goal, as opposed to just saying, do your job. You create expectation, you create a certain amount of pressure, or not pressure, but direction. And darndest thing, if you're not in perfect alignment for the results you're getting.
Yeah, so it's not giving them a low-level statement that overarches. It's more of I'm explaining the higher definition of what I want from you and expectations, and being able to set the direction of where they're gonna go, and now they can actually run with it, going, I understand a lot more of what do my job means, instead of just someone told me do your job, because that might as well be one of these, just whack. Okay, that's not that helpful. I mean, the only thing it does is probably an initial stimuli to work harder for maybe 15 minutes until they're out of the room.
Yeah, great. Yeah,
cool.
It's a cover-up.
It is. So I had one last question for you, Alan.
Sure.
What could we do to get more people equipped and motivated to be in discipleship?
The $10,000 question. Most initiatives like that come down from the top. So depending on the you said discipleship, not mentorship. So when I think of
we can do that too, because we've talked about that. Mentorship really is the general purpose, and then discipleship is more of the mentorship in Christ in the church. So you could really say for either.
Yeah. When it's a value to leadership, and the leadership is able to communicate that value and that vision, and give ways of doing that, churches are good. I want to be careful about overgeneralizing. A lot of churches I've seen are good at having equipping classes, if you will. So they're equipping you to walk in Christ, and there's no grades. There's no assessment of how you're doing with that, just an equipping class. So somebody's teaching a class. If they've taught the class, obviously you've learned it all and it's been all retained in your mind, and you're probably working it out perfectly in practice. So I think that if leadership values mentoring and discipleship, and one man sharpening another and discipling another, that's got to come down from the top. It's got to be taught. It's got to be designed around, I guess, so that there's opportunities. There's probably even some speed dating that happens, or the shepherds know the flock, and they know that this person would be a perfect person to connect with this person. It's a huge responsibility from a leadership standpoint to assume that they're going to do that, all of that, and they're going to have to count on the flock to do some of that themselves, but communicate that. So mentoring, depends if you're talking about corporate America or what environment, what context. I think it's the same thing. It's creating mentoring opportunities and equipping the mentors with maybe just some light structure of, this is a great great way. This is mentoring 101, if you will. This is how you should conduct yourself, whether it's a particular engagement where you have that beginning, end, and or middle and end, or if it's an ongoing thing. But I think we could have done that better in our company. As far as I tried my first team, my cabinet, if you will, I tried to talk to them about how they were talking with their people. Could have probably formalized that more, and given them the more structure around the whole mentor-mentee mentality. But I think we did a fair job of making sure that the technical experts knew that they needed to have a succession plan, if you will. Try to work yourself out of a job, create experts around you. We promise we won't fire you once they get as good as you, because all it would do is make the team stronger, by doing that.
And I think there's a real thing in not just corporate, but in social groups as well. So even if you remove the job aspect and money's not as much of a factor, if you get somebody who did get mentored and all of a sudden they've got a character that really draws people in, and it's kind of taken away from the person who started it. I mean, I think a lot of people have this fear that if they did just that, the mentoring, that they would create people that are better than them, and it would ruin their whole structure. Which, again, if you did it right, that's not really that big of a deal, because now they get to do all the work.
Give me 5 or 10 of those people. They'll work for me for the rest of their lives. Just keep creating people that are better than you. I mean, how do you deny that? And you have to, again, from leadership standpoint, they need to make sure that they're communicating that to those technical leads, that, what I really need you to do, you're an excellent teacher or whatever, a great mentor. You're going to have some guys that are super gifted, and they're going to go running by you 3 years from now, and that'll only make our team stronger. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it'll be more than a Starbucks card for you, I promise. I'm a pizza guy, so I got to be careful with the Starbucks card, but anyway.
Yeah, don't worry, I won't tell them. I'm neutral to both, so
good.
And that's good, because that means it's more coffee for whoever else is out there. That's one less person taking it away.
Oh, brother. Yeah, there's a shortage, I'm sure.
So, Alan, you really got through all the questions. Thank you very much. Did you have anything else you wanted to add from all the content you've said, or clarify anything?
We talked, I think, last time, or maybe in preparation for this talk, just about maintaining our walk with God. And this is a little off topic, I guess, from mentoring and stuff, but just a reminder that we're in a battle. It's a battle that God has ordained, in a sense, and that he's left us with our flesh to deal with. But just a reminder that our sin is not what defines us anymore, but what we battle against. And we have an opportunity to be a slave to righteousness and not to sin. And if I was going to give you homework and say, Jacob, you should study this, I would say, go study walking in the Spirit. What does that look like, being plugged into the vine, getting your power from the Lord, and target fixating on that and not on our sin? Because when you target fixate on that, does the sin go away completely? I wish. That's going to happen when we completely glorify it, like we talked earlier. But if you're walking in the Spirit and you're basically living John 10:10, that's life and life abundantly that Jesus promised, you will sin, and that sin slash asking for forgiveness, 1 John 1:9, being forgiven of your sin, back in right relationship with God. That cycle is a pretty small circle. It happens quickly, and you're back to living this abundant life and walking in the Spirit and being guided by the Spirit. So that's kind of my closing statement. And I will tell you that I have been embracing that with amazing gratitude and thankfulness over the last few years. I'd like to say, oh yeah, I've been doing that for 30 years, but I haven't. I was taught that we really ought to fixate on our sin. And I've come through that portion of my walk to not denying that we sin, or that we still have the flesh. And we talk a lot about sin, although God talks more about money than he does about sin in the New Testament, but because that's a barometer for how, a heart check, if you will. But as I've target fixated on the abundant life and walking in the Spirit and having God direct my life, sin has become much, much less an issue. Do I still sin? Sure, I do. And it's not a so what because God hates sin, but it's been taken care of. And two, and I'm not talking about cheap grace, but two, I don't want to sin. You don't want to sin. I know you don't. You don't love your sin like we did at one time maybe in our lives. I guarantee you that I liked it just fine before I became a believer. So, but if I target fixate on walking in the Spirit, then sin just becomes less of an issue.
Well, now you're aiming at something that has nothing to do with that old life. I'm aiming at Jesus. I'm aiming at the perfect man who came down as God, who was able to beat death by rising from the grave, and that living hope that we keep talking about in BSF. And that seems to be the way out. And that's because Jesus said so. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. He wasn't kidding. We should be aiming at him and then be relieved that, yes, we do have a hope. It's right there, just as it was yesterday and tomorrow and today. And that's something that I think continually is skewed every time we walk out the door because people are thinking it's something else. And no, stop focusing so much on that and focus more on Jesus, the one who is able to... He's the only one that can actually defeat it. And if he already has the grace too, I mean, that's even better. So he's able to knock out sin and have the grace for glorifying his church. It's so interesting to me that we keep trying to focus on sin sometimes in the church more than on the Savior. And he's given
us this new heart. A lot of times I'll hear Jeremiah being quoted, the heart is deceitful beyond belief, who can know it, kind of thing. And then he talks later in Jeremiah about he's going to take away our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh. And we're going to have the opportunity to be slaves to righteousness instead of to sin. It was God's wisdom to leave us with our flesh, I think probably to keep us dependent on him.
Oh, but definitely. I think that's the main reason.
Why focus on that, right? And not that you're brushing it aside, not taking it serious, because it is serious. We're in a battle. That's the whole armor of God thing that we talk about from Ephesians, that we bring this armor of God in order to defend ourselves, in a sense, from the enemy who is trying to win the day. But again, focus on who we are in Christ, on his promises. John Piper calls it being happy in God. He does a neat treatise on walking in the Spirit. And if you're happy in God and you're reciting those, take 3 principles that you really appreciate about, from the New Testament and stick it on your wall or something where you're looking every day. 3 promises from God, and bask in those daily. And it puts you in a whole different headspace.
Yeah, and I think one of the main reasons that people think that, that's not the right answer, and this is probably because it's a worldly view, for one, that people say that, is they keep thinking about man's law versus God's law, and then they mix the two and they say, they're actually the same thing. It's like, they're not. Man's law is what we could figure out to try and keep sin marginalized, but really God's law was something radically different. And then the new covenant is something that supplanted it, saying this is more about being able to follow the right path of Jesus versus the one sin that you may commit in your life that could be millions. And now it's not about the old covenant of sacrificing and focusing so much on the mistake, and now it's about being able to walk in the Spirit. And there's so many people, I think, that still confuse the two and are even confusing. I know it confuses me from time to time, which is why it was so helpful that in Hebrews last night we were able to talk about why Jesus is superior and the main target to continue to pursue.
Yay, yes.
And it's such a relief because there are so many times, even leading up to that, I thought, what am I doing wrong? It's no, what am I aiming at? I think that was the big thing that
it creates a bootstraps and suspenders kind of a situation where we're supposed to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and not sin. Well, good luck with that, Jacob.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, you need Christ, and that broke down a lot of the barriers I think that I would have with an evangelistic thing. So it's like, no, I'm just as big of a problem myself. This is why Jesus, I accepted. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get out of this on my own. I knew it, and so when someone else would ask about my faith now, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get out of this mess on my own, and I needed the highest authority to do it. And I'd recommend the same for everybody else, because if it's true that only one sin without God is what it takes, I mean, that's the whole human race.
Yep. Everybody.
So with that, Alan, I'm really glad we got to have this. I got quite a bit out of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take what we did and put some notes in the description, so I can just, and everyone else can, just click through some of the highlights and see some of the points of the stream where it could have been the most helpful for somebody. So that's what I'm going to do after this. So, Alan, thanks again for having me, getting the time with you today.
Well, I appreciate you, brother. You have wisdom beyond your years. I appreciate you really going after this whole mentor discipleship thing, and I have every expectation that you will continue to be a great mentor throughout your career and your life, and a discipler of Christ followers. So
thank you for the encouragement, Alan. With that, I'm going to end the stream. Thanks everyone for watching.